Good morning. I realized at some point I didn't put my name or contact information anywhere in this presentation, and my staff brought their business cards, but I don't think I brought any of mine. But my name is Kristen. I'm the director of Harvest Pierce County. I wasn't really paying that close attention, but how many of you were in the presentation just now that happened in this room? So I'll try and add some details for those of you that weren't, but this presentation is really not focusing so much on the what of Harvest Pierce County, because my amazing team just talked about it. And really, when we were asked to present here, the message that got trickled to me is that what folks wanted to hear was about how you go about funding something like Harvest Pierce County. It is not yet considered super traditional for districts to do urban ag, and so our program is one of the older ones at this point, and I think pretty broad in scope, as you've learned from those of you who sat in this room for the previous hour. So I'm going to kind of walk through the journey of Harvest Pierce County, which at this point is almost 20 years, and so it's been a while, and there have been different phases. And so I'm going to tell some stories about things that happened along the way, but I'm really trying to, in this presentation, have it not sound like Harvest Pierce County is this unicorn, but that there was a thing that happened that all of you can do too. And so I'm trying to, in putting this together, pull out the themes that could be applicable in whatever county you're in, whatever size district you're a part of, whatever community yours looks like. All right, so just a little overview for those of you who weren't in the room for the last hour. We were officially born from an initiative in 2010. That's when I first had like a paycheck and a job that was supporting community gardens. But as the story will unfold here in a little bit, it actually started several years before that. We think of our work at this intersection of healthy food, healthy community, and a healthy environment. Those three pillars really are necessary for any of the projects we take on. We've had lots of folks ask us to take on different projects over the years, but we really try and limit it to those ones that really have a strong intersection with those three components. And we really think of our role in the food system as engaging the community in this work of building a just and healthy food system. So you've heard about all the many things that we do. We think about it in terms of these three main buckets: our community garden program, our gleaning program, and our farm program. And these each have very different funding stories. So I mentioned these not so much to go into the details of them, but that each of them has a very different kind of origin story in terms of like how it came to be and how the funding for it is organized. So our community garden program, we really support community members to collaboratively manage these spaces in their communities. We don't own community gardens, we don't manage them on the behalf of community members. Now, on some occasion, we will get out there when there's an access issue or something that folks can't do on their own. We'll get out there with volunteers and try and support. But for the most part, we try and connect them to resources and then get out of their way. The gleaning program, as you've heard, is predominantly working with backyard fruit trees. Devin mentioned that we get a lot of our funding for that from the solid waste utilities as really part of a food waste prevention strategy. There's also a connection to our local farms, and that program actually kind of came to us kind of a little more fully baked. It wasn't something that we kind of grew, but it was something that we adopted. And then our farm programming really kind of grew out of the programming that was already existed and already funded, really based on what we were hearing in the community was a huge need. So I'll go into more detail in a little bit. Here's just a few numbers I like to share. This is, Jocelyn said 96. I actually think the number is 94. Community gardens. It's actually harder to keep track than you would think. Partly because this number I think is actually the more important number, that they represent like 65 different property owners between Eatonville and Fox Island. So like a county is a really large area. I know you all are also struggle probably to like serve an entire county. And so for those of us in Pierce County, that's the range. It's a really large geographic area, and they're all really diverse because they are on different property owners. And our role as the district is really this bridge between the gardeners, the community members that are doing the actual work, and the landowners who are providing obviously essential resources like land and often water. This is the most up-to-date numbers that I have for the pounds that have been donated to the emergency food system through the gleaning program since 2014. And then the bottom number, the 14 is number of farm businesses that have been started by alumni of our Farm Foundations program. And then the 11 is the number of new and beginning farm businesses that are currently housed at our incubator farm. So that's
yeah, you said that solid waste supports the gleaning program. Do they also support a composting program within the city county, or is this?
They as part of their food waste program, they do also collect food into their composting program. That hasn't always been true, though, that they had a composting program. They're actually one of the nation's first like yard waste collection composting programs since 1991. They've collected yard waste, and it's only recently that they've added food at the county level. And the city of Tacoma has accepted food earlier on. All right, so this is really kind of the meat of the presentation here, is to kind of talk about the different phases of Harvest Pierce County's development over time and the different things that were happening in the different phases. And really try and help you, if you're interested in doing something similar, think about where you are in terms of the developmental phase and what might be some things that you could take home, some lessons to apply in your own efforts to get this kind of thing happening in your community. And so I'm going to go through the journey. I'll talk a little bit about the story and then spend some time on the lessons learned. So 2006, that's like when the story starts for me, because that's when I started grad school, and this was kind of roughly the result of a graduate school project that I decided to take on. So that's when I came to Tacoma. My initial role in this was as a team member at the Tagro wastewater treatment plant, or the city of Tacoma's wastewater treatment plant, where they produce Tagro, which is Class A biosolids product. And I managed the parking and the garden. And I was very interested in like helping something like this happen in Pierce County, although it was very off in the distance and very fuzzy. And in hindsight, it all obviously like happened according to plan, but there was no plan so much in the beginning. But I met some other folks who also had similar visions, and we began this kind of very low budget community organizing effort. And so it was a lot of volunteer energy. It was a lot of fun. It was a very exciting. I made some good friends who I'm still friends with today. Sarah Wilcox, who's a part of the Conservation Commission now, she was on this team of people. She worked for Pierce Conservation District at the time, and so her little budget was the one that funded a lot of the things that we pulled off. And so it was a very kind of spontaneous and exciting and fun thing. And then that period of time was awesome, and those types of times don't typically last forever. It's not sustainable to rely entirely on volunteer energy and enthusiasm. You really need to bring in more partners and more resources. So we moved down the road to this other phase that I called coalition building. And that was this process of really bringing more people into the project and into the process. And it involved not just volunteers and really excited staff members with very little power and authority, but policymakers and people with bigger budgets at bigger agencies, and making connections between those, and connections with agencies and organizations that didn't historically work together. And then that moved down the road to like what's really kind of our meat and potatoes today, our partnerships with other local governments. And since the very beginning, that has been a cornerstone of our programming and our stability, that we actually started this 2010 date. We were not a part of the Pierce Conservation District. We started and were housed by another local nonprofit, and were then adopted later into the Conservation District as part of this process of really building out our government partnerships. And it was the result of many relationships, not just the Conservation District taking on something by itself. Kind of at the same time as the program started to build out, we really began to expand our programmatic partners, and really reaching out to all the groups that were already working in this in the sphere of food and community and environment and trying to figure out how we could do more together. And then from 2012 to today, we do obviously also get grants, but it's never been the core part of how we funded ourselves. And I'm always a little skeptical about grants, about whether the effort to do them is going to be worth the reward. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. That's not true for all of them. We've gotten some amazing, very generous grants, but I'm wary about them as a way to sustain a program. All right, so I'm going to go through each of those sections in a little more detail. All right, so this community engagement phase. So I was a student at the University of Washington. I made friends with the person who was doing communications at the city of Tacoma. And like, as I mentioned, Sarah, who was at the Conservation District, and another friend who was doing a fellowship at the health department. We were all women of about the same age, and we started having coffee together and scheming and making big plans. And so none of us were like paid to actually do that kind of thing. It was something we kind of squeezed into the things we were otherwise responsible for. But I think that this is an important start of getting something started. It was close enough to each of us and the things we were doing already that we could justify it mostly. And so that's part of like finding those people who are like, for whom it is a reasonable expansion and where there's a lot of already natural energy because people are hopefully excited about the things they're already doing. And so even though it was like a group of 4 ladies who didn't have any power or authority at the time, there were some broad partnerships already forming, and that we had the Conservation District, the Health Department, the city, and then the University of Washington. And so we represented like a lot of these kind of early partnerships, even though at the time it's not like we had big budgets. And we had big ideas though, and we started doing community engagement events, very low budget community engagement events. But we could tell that there was energy in the community about more community gardens. There were about 6 community gardens in Tacoma Pierce County at this time. And we were hearing from people that there was an interest in having a lot more. And so we were talking to people. We hosted our first big event was this panel discussion where we brought together people, everyone that we could find that was doing anything related. We had the Master Gardener Coordinator. We had folks who were involved in the community gardens that did exist. We had some small farmers. And we just talked about food and like what people wanted to see more of in the area. And people, like, it was this little coffee shop event, and people stayed till like 10 o'clock because there was a lot of energy and a lot of excitement, just brainstorming things that could happen. And so that kind of kicked off our efforts. Thank God, one of the people on our team was a communications person who thought to collect emails and then create a little newsletter. And so it looked like things were happening and people were able to kind of keep up with the next couple things that were planned. We planned several tours of the existing community gardens because one of the things we heard from some of the agencies that we met with was that there was no interest in community gardening in the area. So we showed people where they were. We told people how to get involved, and lo and behold, all of a sudden there were waiting lists at all the gardens. And we also hosted these events to just build community and get people talking to each other and just having conversations about what people wanted the food system to look like in Pierce County. Again, all very low budget, like cuties and granola bars, not catered fancy food. At the same time, we were also having a lot of meetings with people who were working in the system. And there wasn't so much happening in those days, so it wasn't an infinite number of people to talk to, but we went and talked with the Park District, who was the group that like managed the community gardens that existed at that time. And we asked them, like, so what is happening? What are the barriers? WSU had programming in the schools. We talked with there, and then everyone who I talked to, I asked who else we should talk to. And so like through like many coffee shop meetings, we're able to kind of piece together the network of people. And at this time there was nothing official. It was just relationship building and kind of gathering information about what the community wanted and what the barriers were. And so those were like the real lessons of that time. It was just a process, and it was several years of just like being in conversation with the community about, so what do you want to see happen in your community? What does healthy food look like to you? What kind of relationship do you want to have with your food system? and trying to figure out what that was gonna look like for Pierce County. Yeah.
So is there any, how did you document what you were doing? I mean, did you like create a little map of who are all the partners and the arrows, or I mean, is there any kind of thing that you actually did to keep track of all this?
At one point, we got a little grant to put up a website. And then that was where we like put information about what was happening. It's long since defunct, so it's not like a record that I could share. Yeah, I'd say, you know, none of us were like thinking so much about that. I might have like some old notes and like an old computer, but we were young and pretty inexperienced and didn't have that. We weren't sure where we were going with it all.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah, so talking to the community and figuring out what they want, talking mostly to the folks who were already like working in the system and understanding the barriers, and then building the energy and grassroots support. At some point, when we got a little bit closer to making it a reality, I did put together a proposal kind of based on, I forgot about this until you asked that question, a proposal based on what we had heard about like what we thought there should be more of. It was really focused on community gardens at the time. I mean, everything else that you've heard Harvest Pierce County does today has grown out of this community garden effort in the very beginning. But yeah, it was more about like the energy than about any kind of official program plan at that point. All right, so then the next phase is what I call coalition building. And I think for those of you who like already work in urban ag, maybe you know this. For those of you who don't yet, or maybe won't work in urban ag, I think this is something that is pretty special about urban agriculture. It's one of the challenges, but it's also one of the strengths, that there's not one agency out there who claims urban agriculture as their thing. And so and if you look nationwide, look at all the different ways where urban agriculture is happening, it happens in all sorts of different places. A lot of times it's housed like in a municipality or in a parks department. Like the extensions systems are some of the agencies that do it. Conservation districts have been doing it more and more. A lot of the times it's nonprofits, but there's not one way to do it. There's not one right answer to how to support urban ag happening. Did you have a question? No, okay. And so I think it's one of the challenges and it's one of the strengths, and that urban agriculture touches so many different things that people care about. And so building coalitions is really one of the keys to having it be successful in the community. And so that's what this next phase was really about. It happened that in this moment in Tacoma, our health department received a grant from the CDC called Achieve. And it was related to childhood obesity because that was the issue at the time that people were caring about. But I mention it not so much because that grant was the important thing, but it was a 3-year grant, which helped. It gave some time, and the purpose of it was about building a coalition. That was in the structure of the grant, to bring together not just a coalition of policymakers, but structurally connecting policymakers to grassroots energy. And so it was really about bringing lots of different people in lots of different places in the system to the table all at the same time. And so the health department had this role of like bringing together policymakers who cared about health, who cared about children, who cared about our community, who cared about agriculture, and then tapped into the community energy I was on that side of the thing at the time. I was part of the community that was making this energy happen, but I wasn't making the energy happen. I was just kind of making it visible because the energy was already there, that Pierce County had a lot of interest in having more opportunities to access land to grow food for themselves. And so there were a lot of meetings, but what happened is that there became this group of people that all cared about making something happen. It took a long time and a lot of meetings to take all the energy and coalesce it into a program plan and a budget to make something real. But it happened partly because there were so many agencies and organizations and people at the table that there was no way nothing was going to happen from that. And the metaphor that people used at the time, maybe you've heard of like the idea of stone soup. It's just like no one really has anything to offer, but if you put everything that everyone's got into a pot, you can have a pot of soup. that then everyone can drink from, eat from. And so that's really how it felt, that this was the years after the Great Recession. And so like no agency had extra money. And government was very wary at the time of like doing something big or new because they couldn't pay their bills. But hunger was a huge issue. People knew that. And there was a lot of interest in doing something that felt like it was a good thing for the community. So like I said, one of the challenges of urban ag is it doesn't have like one champion, but one of the strengths is that it has many champions. And so this is just like a sample of some of the agencies that kind of showed up in those coalition building years and became part of the coalition and are still part of our coalition today. So you got community livability groups that care about how communities come together and build community in their neighborhoods. Environmental and sustainability groups that care about carbon footprints and like habitat in urban areas and how far your food travels and whether your food is grown with good practices. You got the food justice and the hunger and the food banks, so like making sure people have access to food, people have like sovereignty and land access. You got healthcare and public health. Like I said, initially it was about childhood obesity. I don't hear about that much these days, but it was really about shifting how cities function so kids have access to physical activity and better nutrition, and so more food and places to grow food was part of that. As I mentioned earlier, we have gotten a lot of funding from the solid waste, the city and county utilities that manage solid waste, and I would put our City of Tacoma partners in that too, because they we have partnered from the beginning with their wastewater, which is also a waste recycled product, and so they've been big partners from the beginning, and it just so happens those things are good for gardening and also need to be recycled, and gardening is good for that. And then obviously the agriculture and food systems groups like the conservation districts, the farmers markets were actually like big partners and helpers in the very beginning, just recognizing that if more urban people grew their own food, they would value their own local food system and seek out their local farms more. And then just like environmental education and helping kids and everyone know where their food comes from and the importance of having healthy soil and healthy water and all the things you all do for a living. And this is just like a sample list. And so my question to all of you to think about for your own communities is like, who in your community would be on this list? Who's missing from this and who else might be found? So the lessons of this coalition building phase are really this, that urban agriculture has many friends. And I think it's true even in counties that aren't so urban, growing food and getting food to people and teaching people how to grow their own food has many benefits. And so think about who is in your community who cares about that you could tap into for friendship. And then the reason why we were actually able to be successful is that at some point, it wasn't just us little grassroots kids that had no power or authority. At some point, policymakers got involved and people with budgets at organizations got involved. And so you need friends at all levels though. It's not, the policymakers all by themselves don't make anything happen. Same with like the organizational managers, which is kind of how I am today. I don't make anything happen by myself. I have a team of people that gets out in the community and builds relationships and makes the real work happen. And so everybody's important and you need to build relationships at all levels. And then the last one is, maybe some of you are familiar with this term, the ABCD. It's called asset-based community development. It's the whole thing. You can get books on it. But the simple message of it is just looking at your community and seeing it for its assets and seeing who's there, who's doing work, where's their energy, where's their momentum, and finding that and building upon that. All right, so the next phase is kind of where we kind of stabilized and became a little more of an institution ourselves, thanks to governmental partnerships. And we have since the beginning brought in a lot more funding from outside of our conservation district than we've ever gotten from the inside. And that is, I think, obviously helpful for accessing funding, but also important for having us be accountable to a community that's broader than our little district. And we have a bigger district than most counties. I think we have a staff of 30-ish. But we are still just, that's just 30 people trying to serve a whole county. And so these governmental partnerships help us connect to other folks who are also serving the county, who are trying to make good things happen. So in this process of all this coalition coming together, agreeing on a program plan, agreeing on some metrics, agreeing on who was going to chip in which pieces, that instead of just like birthing a program and leaving it all by itself, we formed a steering committee. And the steering committee kind of helped steward that little program, which in the beginning was just me. And so the steering committee was really the people that I had to go to for help and ideas and strategic thinking. And they represented a lot more than I would have ever had access to on my own. And it was then my job to bring more people into that steering committee that hadn't been a part of that process, or kind of knew it was happening, but were kind of waiting to see what was going to happen. That's very common government. They're like, well, we'll wait and see if something actually going to happen, and then we'll get involved. So that was part of my early work, is like building that steering committee, building those partnerships, supporting that group to go through a strategic planning process to really get clear and get bought in to the long-term work of the organization. And the kind of the result, in addition to like the program work that was happening at that time, that steering committee wrote an MOU that had 4 different agencies signed on that agreed to create one regional urban agriculture program that was going to serve the whole county. And so that was the city of Tacoma, that was Pierce County. In Tacoma, we have a separate taxing district that is our Parks District called Metro Parks Tacoma, and then the Pierce Conservation District. And so, the Pierce Conservation District's role at that time was really just like to take inside organizationally the program. They, at that time, were extremely budget strapped and resource strapped. There was no place even for us to have a desk. And so one of our other partners, our Parks District, gave us a building, and we had laptops and cell phones, and we sat in someone else's building, and that's how things got started. But it was one of those things where each organization pitched in what they could, and then we came up with one plan and one program with lots of partners. And so this is kind of a cheesy, stock photo from the internet about teamwork, but this is really how it happened. That this, like, when you hear my team talk about all the amazing things that we do, this on the back end is what's happening. That there's a lot of different folks, agencies who give money, and other program partners, and I'll get to them in a minute, that contribute to this pool of resources that then comes out and gets a cute Harvest Pierce County logo on it. But we are not doing this alone. So these are the big ones: the health department, the city, the Parks District, the county, and obviously the conservation district in our area. I think these are big. They probably also exist in your county. There's probably a big-ish city. There's a county government. There's a health department. WSU Extension is maybe on this list in certain places. And then I don't know who else is where you are, but I would encourage you to find these people and to make friends. And the reason why the conservation district became the home, and I think this is true probably for you as well, is that none of these big agencies wanted to start a whole new program. That from their perspective, it would have cost so much more money and been so much harder to make something like Harvest Pierce County start within one of them. It was way easier for them to carve out a piece of their money that was designated for education and outreach and community engagement, all these things they know they should do, but they're not connected to the community enough to actually pull off. That's one of the niches of conservation districts, is we actually work with people, landowners, land stewards, people who are just trying to do the right thing for the environment, and in our case, and grow food for themselves. And so the people who work for these other agencies are I think, have more red tape and more bureaucracy in between them and the actual community. It's hard. And maybe in smaller places it's not as hard, but in Pierce County, it's hard for our city and our county compatriots to like actually do authentic community outreach. And so that's our niche, that's our job, is to be that bridge between these folks who can't really do that, but they've got resources and they know they should. They give it to us, and then we can be this bridge between these other bigger public agencies and the people who are actually need the services and who want to do the programs and projects that we're connected to. Also, conservation, this is obvious to all of you, conservation districts make sense because we're trusted in areas of agriculture. That these other agencies like the city and the county, they don't know about cover crops, they don't know about soil testing, they don't know. And so while urban agriculture is still also very much an emerging field, the basics of agriculture are the same. And so conservation districts are trusted. And so it's an easier sell to be like, so yes, I get it, that you don't want to actually deal with the humans that are growing food on your land. They just don't have the resources. When like Metro Parks is one example I'll use in the very beginning, they had a bunch of community gardens on their land, but they didn't have anybody on staff who knew anything about connecting community members to each other or to help them kind of work out any kind of issues that they were having. The only people they had on their staff were the guys who would go out and fix the water or fix the fence or like till the site, if that was something that's something they used to do before they listened to community members, and then community members told them to stop that, so they did. But we were just this huge relief for them, that they could just give us a little bit of money from their perspective, and we could actually talk to the community members and have meetings and help them talk to each other and work out whatever issues they had going on, so that the guys who come out to fix this pipe system don't get harangued with questions about this, that, and that. And so like in addition to knowing a thing or two about agriculture, my team also knows about people and how to help people work together and figure out what they want over time. And so I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but there were many years before the conservation district chipped into our programming in terms of budget at all, that we were primarily funded by these other governmental folks for the first 7 or 8 years of our existence. And now it's more of a shared partnership, but the majority of our funding still comes from outside. All right, so kind of at the same time as we were building these relationships with other government to help make the dollars flow, we were also reaching out to all the people who we could find in the community who were doing similar work. And so we had the strategic goal from the very beginning to, instead of come in and create something new and be in competition with whoever was there before, we worked to find and understand what was already existing in the county and come in to support it. So rather than like a container that tried to contain everything, come in like a bowl and figure out how to sustain or support from underneath. And so there was a lot of strategy around like, what resources do folks need to be successful and how can we provide that, rather than like come in and say, okay, we're gonna do this now. And we reached out to friends and asked what we could do together. And so I think this is also something that you can all do, is just think about who in your county is doing anything similar, and figure out what they need and what they want to do more of what they're doing, and figure out how you could collaborate to do more. This is just a sampling of the different programming that we do, but the reason we're able to do it is because we have partners. We have now, I use the 10-year anniversary logo, but we have now the 12th year anniversary of our Edible Gardens programming. It's an intro to gardening workshop series that we've done every year. We do it from February to October and do a lot of the different topics that people want to see and hear about gardening. We have some new classes this year for the first time in a while. And the reason we're able to do it is because we have a partnership with Pierce County's environmental education team, and they teach half the classes. And so it would be a huge undertaking for just my team, but we only have to do half of it. And they are actually professional educators. And this year they actually came in and did a little training for my team who aren't necessarily professional educators, to kind of give them some tips and tricks on how to be more successful when teaching to a group of people. You heard Devin talk about the Glean Project. We have led that for the last decade, but we also have a strong partner in an organization that's relatively new called Food is Free Tacoma. And so they have their own version of cleaning that they do. They focus more on the commercial food that would have gotten wasted as in terms of the food moving around in semi trucks and get that to community. They're also working to grow food and give it away. And so we have contracted with them to also partner with our fruit tree efforts. And so a lot of the food that gets harvested goes through them for distribution. Our Farm Foundations program, that exists in partnership because we don't own the land that the farming happens on. We don't own any of the materials or the cooler or any of those things. And now that I've tried to put all that infrastructure in at our Goss farm, I totally am grateful for all the support that we've received from these other places that already had that there for us. So we get to show up and to have this educational programming in this farm that's maintained by our friends. Devin mentioned Radical Growth, which is our horticultural therapy program that's in our second year. That happens also in partnership with these licensed therapists that also have their own nonprofit that they're working to figure out what that's going to look like in the future. And then our community garden program, I don't know how to get that.
Yeah, it looks like it's cut off on the Zoom too, so I think just the slide got cut.
Yeah. But yeah, our community garden program have from the beginning had a partnership with the city of Tacoma's Tagro program. And so to the question earlier about urban sites in Tacoma and how do we support urban gardening in a place that doesn't necessarily have healthy soil, well, they have a potting soil product that fills raised beds, and you know, we joke that it's like gardening for dummies. You just have to like add water and seed and things grow. And so we've been able to transform some pretty unproductive properties into productive growing areas. We have also done soil testing. We've never actually found any of our sites that actually have high metals levels. Tacoma has a bad reputation for being really polluted. It's not as polluted as people think anymore. But just to be safe, we do encourage raised beds. And most folks want that anyways, especially in some of the urban areas that don't have healthy soil, even if it wasn't something that people were concerned about.
Do you charge for the edible gardening?
No, and we used to do it, oh my gosh, we used to do it in like 5 different locations around the county, each class, so that to make it accessible to people. And this is one of the things I thank God for COVID, because we did learn to do it online. And so now we just teach it once, and we make it available on Zoom. And so it's a lot less effort, which is good because the team always finding new things to do. So the lessons around the program partnerships is you can do a lot more working together. So think about who else is doing things and maximize the networks and minimize the work. One of the iterations of our strategic plan had the tagline, creating a community of abundance. And I think that is really kind of in the heart of Harvest Pierce County, and that what we're trying to do is like create abundance, and think about that not just in the seeds that we're trying to spread and the apples that we're harvesting, but in the relationships and in the resources that exist in the community. That there's enough for everybody, and to try and not be gatekeepers and compete, but to like support abundance in the work. And make room for different groups to have different strengths. We have our niche that's become more clear over time. It wasn't so obvious in the beginning, and really support other groups to have other niches. All right, so we have gotten grants. Some of them have been key along the way to help us kind of leap from one stage of development to the next. I mentioned the Achieve grant. That was obviously essential for getting things like to leap into like actual nonprofit paid person structure from a bunch of grassroots folks. We got a huge grant from the Paul Allen Foundation around like a year or 2 into the programming. And that allowed, it was a $100,000 grant, and it was enough to allow me to hire a person for 2 years. Things were less expensive back then. But that was also essential. And it was the moment where I didn't have to do things all by myself, but I had a buddy to help. And that was that was huge for like helping us like keep up with the demand of what was happening in the community. We have been twice recipients of the NACD Urban and Community Conservation Grant. So if you don't know about that, you should. It funds this type of work and you should all apply. And it's one of the good grants out there, and that they want it to be, at least in part, for staff time. Because a lot of grants out there want to help you build raised beds, but they don't actually want to pay for the humans that make it all happen. There's a lot of money in healthcare, and healthcare is more and more seeing food production as something that's important for health. And so we've gotten grants from our healthcare system, including a really big one from the Kaiser Foundation several years ago. And then the state also has money, and is more and more wanting to support this kind of thing. Our whole team, our Pierce CD team, has relied for many years on a bunch of AmeriCorps. We have a cohort of between 5 and 7 every year, and they are absolutely essential for helping do things and also bring in fresh energy and ideas. And it's a very affordable way to get a lot of human capacity. We do our best to help give them other benefits like professional development and whatnot. So, and acknowledge that they earn a lot less than the regular FTEs that we have. And so it can be somewhat awkward to have that kind of differential between AmeriCorps members and team members, and we do our best to navigate that. We've gotten funding from the Department of Community Forestry from the state, and that actually helped launch our fruit tree education programming years and years ago. We actually don't do that anymore for capacity reasons, but as Devin was talking about our fruit tree and our pest and disease problems, we do still have a form of that that's more direct staff to homeowner. There is a huge need for education around how to navigate the pest and disease issues in our fruit trees. And so while we're not currently doing a lot of programming around that, it's obviously a thing that we're thinking about. And then the Washington State Department of Agriculture has a local food infrastructure grant. And this is more for small scale farmers than community gardens, but we did receive that this year and are in the process of spending that. Time's ticking. Need to have it all done by the end of the month. But that has really been a game changer in terms of building out our incubator farm and our urban farm, and helping those spaces get the infrastructure they need to actually farm. So there are important grants to know about that can certainly help this kind of thing. I tend to kind of, when I see a grant come across my email pile, I tend to think about it, is this like big enough for people, or is it too small and we would need to buy things? Because it's all about figuring out how much human capacity we have to actually do all the work. And I think because so many of the grants for this type of work are really about the things, it's easy to fall into a trap of like getting all these grants to buy things, but then you don't actually have the people to buy the thing and build the thing and make the thing happen. And so we don't go after every little grant. In fact, a lot of the smaller grants, we on purpose don't go after, because we have a lot of other partner groups, nonprofits, that we try and send those grants to and help them do that level of work. And really try and prioritize our efforts for the bigger ones that would actually pay for a new human. And yeah, and just also being wary that to make sure you have the systems in place to administer grants, it's not always simple. And it's definitely something to take on with caution. That's why I strongly recommend a strategy that involves more local government partnerships, because while I do have to do reporting and things for that, they mostly just send us money. And it's reliable. And once you kind of get into the budget of some of these bigger agencies, it's a lot less work and a lot less fluctuations over time than going after grants. And then always making sure that if you are going to go after a grant, it's going to be a bunch more work. Making sure that the team actually has that extra capacity, that it will make their job easier, at least in the medium term, even if not in the short term. Because otherwise you end up just like squished. He was so cute when I was going through this, there's no meaning to this. He's cute, and it is kind of the transition from that, like the history to like I have 2 more slides of like other lessons learned, and then I'll have time for questions. I hope. So then like these. Sorry, go back. So and then these are like I don't know, like other things that are not so much funding related, but that I feel are like the keys to our success over the years. And I don't feel successful in all the moments, but I mostly feel like we have achieved something pretty great, and I think these are some of the reasons why when I think about it. So I think from the beginning, and it's a constant work, and it has evolved over time, working to engage diverse people, engage the whole county. Partly because that's our job as public servants, and partly because that's where a lot of really great ideas are, and partly because that's the right thing to do. And so really working to build relationships with the whole community, building trusting relationships, hiring a diverse team of people, and then listening to them over time. So I think that's been a key to our success. There's a question about whether our Edible Gardens workshop is free. Everything we've ever done is free to the community. And we work to have things be accessible in other ways too, not just dollar-wise, but we try and make our opportunities family friendly, bring your kids, try and do them in days and times when people can get there, acknowledging the struggle that many people have to survive and pay the bills these days, and trying to figure out how to support people's lives rather than be a cost. And then work to build a good reputation and just do what you say you will do in the community. And that trust that we have with other partners and with community members that builds on itself. And so I have community partners now. We're just like, oh, I love working with you. They find resources and they're like, hey, I thought of you. Do you want this? I say, yes, thank you. And then also from the beginning, relationships are absolute core to our work. And so we value those. And whenever we're in a sticky situation and we're not quite sure what to do, we ask ourselves this question, like, what will support healthy relationships and what will grow our relationships? That's what we choose to do. And so, like I said, we are the synthesis of many, many people, many partners, official, unofficial, that do the work. And so we sometimes get the credit for doing things that other people did. And so we do our best to make sure people know who's responsible and thank people and thank the many friends that make this work happen. And then, yeah, listen to the community, get in a relationship with them and listen to them about what they want. And this includes your team. And I mean this when I say this, all the best ideas and programs that our team manages today have come from the people I've hired, not me. Everything we do. And it's evolved over time, partly because I hire people who are really passionate about the work and they're like, you know what we really should do. And we can't always do it all in the moment because all these other things about resources and time. But it's an evolution over time around what the community wants and needs, and we try and listen and do. Yeah, and then the last is just to dream big. I had no idea in 2006 when I was having coffee with my friend Alicia, which was the first meeting I had, that I would be here today talking about all this stuff, and I would have this awesome team of people who's also talking about all the stuff that we're doing. And it has been 18 years. So it doesn't happen overnight, but there's a lot of energy for this type of work in the community, and I'm pretty sure you can tap into it too. And we are also a resource. I think we are one of the bigger and one of the older groups doing this kind of stuff. And so I didn't put my contact information into this PowerPoint, but you can find me, and I'm happy to talk if you have questions. And I couldn't find the picture of all of us, so it's not all of us in this picture. Yeah. Yeah. What?
What is your total budget?
Which is what we really want to know.
Yeah. You know, I actually don't know. That actually has more to do with our administrative transitions over the last several years. I think it's around 500 to 600,000. I have 5 FTE and an AmeriCorps on my team. And me. And we have decent, healthy budgets for professional services and events and supplies. And so most of that, I'd say 2/3 of that is external contracts. I have around like 400,000 in like recurring governmental partnerships, and the rest is either one-off grants or grants.
Your incubator farms, do you lease those or how does that work?
Yes, we do lease the quarter acre parcels for $100 a year.
So how did you acquire that?
Oh,
land
what
to be
are,
able to-
yes, that land is owned by WSU, and we have a long-term lease with them that is free to us because we invested in the improvement of the property. So we installed a water meter and so much more. But in order to get things going, that was the deal. So we installed a water meter that improved the property, so they were able to legally give us a long-term lease for free. It's expensive to put in a water meter.
So in your relationships with like city of Tacoma, I know that like our county owns parcels, a ton of land. I don't even know how much they own. How do you like identify parcels that have the potential for urban A that could be like maybe used by a community group? Is there somebody at Parks or Metro Parks that like works for you?
Yeah, in the beginning, it was a lot easier because it was post-recession and there was vacant parcels everywhere. The city, when we came into being, the city had recently done an inventory of all the land they had basically forgotten that they'd owned, had fallen off their maintenance list. And they carved out a bunch of those, looked at them and asked whether that would be appropriate for a community garden in terms of like, was it flat-ish? Did it have a bunch of trees? And gave us a bunch to start with. When we kind of came back and asked for property to do urban farming, it was much, much harder, partly because the environment had shifted in terms of land access. You know, like the answer to one of the questions in the previous session, like what are the challenges? And it's absolutely land access these days, but that wasn't true in the beginning. That the political environment and just the needs of the community have changed tremendously. And so it's much harder now, and the city doesn't really have a good way of finding those parcels. And I've asked them to develop a good way, and they have not yet. So. Yeah.
In Thurston County, yeah, we had some GIS work that we did our contract with the city of Olympia, and one of our people that does GIS identified what are the 5 spaces or spaces for agriculture. So that was something that, and now he works with USDA as of 2 weeks ago.
Sorry.
This is really amazing, thank you. So like, how long did it take you to stabilize?
Are we stable? I mean, it's been a journey and there's been different phases. I mean, one level of stability was having it be my job and not this thing I was trying to pull off on the side. Then another level of stability was having a team. And then another level of stability was when it was our conservation district increased their rates. And there was like, okay, now there's like kind of more money for everybody. And so I wasn't so freaked out about any one partner falling off. And I would say along the way, there have consistently been more ideas and more demand than humans to do it. And so I'm not sure it's ever felt stable because there's always more that we could do, and trying to balance, you know, health and well-being and community demand and things people are excited about. So.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear you talk about like this patient sense and urgency of like addressing childhood obesity in that second year, so community engagement, and who knows where this is going to. But I've been thinking entirely too much about transportation, and moving food around, like back past parking, right? So like, this place could be way cooler, like farmers market and parking, right, these access points where people are coming in and out, but have you heard of anything around public transportation, school transportation, and food distribution?
I haven't, but that doesn't mean it's not a good idea. So, yeah, I mean, I would talk to the people in your community who are in those spaces and see what they're working with. And maybe there's some grant out there to like help those spaces be healthier spaces and, you know, not such a urban heat island or whatever is the challenge that people who are doing that type of work face. I don't know.
Can I add on to that? One, you might keep an eye on what Snohomish County is doing. They're building a food hub right now on a county park where extension used to be, but they're building a food hub for farmers to be able to come in and a distribution center, but it's also tagged right in with the rail line expansion and a food desert within the same area. And so they've gotten some tagline funding from the legislature, but they should be starting to build some of that stuff this next year. So you might kind of look at that model.
Our local health department has created an accessible map online that has transportation and supermarkets, all of those different layers in it as well.
I think kids have really done a little food, motion grant to do an investigation infrastructure study, looking at how, because like food banks move food, the farmers are moving food, and we're hoping to do efficiencies around that.
Okay, thank you.